Beef Wellington, when perfectly executed, highly impresses me. For years I was intimidated to make one. My goal is to show you how to make Beef Wellington so it much less intimidating. Beef Wellington is a luxurious dish where puff pastry is wrapped around beef tenderloin, then sliced into portions to serve. But it is more than that. There are different layers of flavor within the Wellington that make it truly spectacular. Make no mistake, though, it's a fabulous dish to make year-round. Was this written to pretend to be AI? I don't know. I don't think so. This is the kind of shit AI should be for dumb stuff. Unfortunately, this was written by a human, I think. I have seen a number of different Beef Wellington recipes throughout my years. You start doing all the steps and assume that if you follow the directions that you should be left with a perfect result. I'm here to tell you that this often isn't the case, sadly. I wanted to call this article The Realist's Guide to Beef Wellington, but I came to my senses. It is a labor of love making Beef Wellington, but it is absolutely worth it. Give yourself plenty of time and don't try to rush things. Take the time to learn the helpful tips in this guide and it will make all the difference. I've received so much joy from people who have used this guide and had great success. My biggest problem in the past has been overcooking it or having portions of the pastry get soggy. I'll explain why that happened and how you can prevent it. There are a few helpful tips and tricks I've learned along my culinary journey that I feel are worth sharing. See, when we say landscape, I mean that it's going to take like 8,000 paragraphs until we actually get to the recipe. That is the landscape experience. Bro, I did not realize how tiny the scroll bar is. Oh god, this article's crazy long. Okay, well, I guess this is what the rest of the stream is now. What is Beef Wellington? When I think of a Beef Wellington recipe in its basic form, I envision beef tenderloin surrounded by Disels? Sure. Then wrapped in puff pastry. Beef Wellington can be made from a large center-cut piece of beef tenderloin, then sliced to serve. Before I get more involved in the recipe, I want to make sure everyone is familiar with some of the terminology. And then they continue to not elaborate, because we're already on to a new section. I love this for us. Can we go back to the start for the raiders? Oh my god, okay. But I'm not going back anymore after this. If we somehow get another raid, I refuse to go backwards. I cannot believe you're making me read this again. Y'all, I'm gonna need so much water. Anyways. What cut of beef do I use in Beef Wellington? A large center-cut piece of beef tenderloin is used to make Beef Wellington. Beef tenderloin is the muscle that individual filet mignon steaks are cut from. A whole beef tenderloin, however, is fatter in the middle and tapered toward the ends. You can think of it as the center cut of tenderloin. You said that already. Help me. What is left of the tenderloin is often cut into chunks or strips of beef for a number of different dishes. For my Beef Wellington, I am using a 3-pound Private Reserve Chateaubriand from Omaha Steaks. Oh, that's a sponsor plug for the record. They have a link to the actual steak that they're using. Very cool. If we are being technical, the term Chateaubriand in today's terms refers to a filet mignon roast which is cut from the very center of the beef tenderloin. Did you know that it's cut from the center of the tenderloin? I don't know if she said it enough for us to be aware. It's the center cut! I understand! The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell! I get it! But Chateaubriand is classically a method by which the center portion of the beef tenderloin is cooked and not the beef itself. The muscles or meat which was trimmed off the whole beef tenderloin were used to wrap around the center portion of the roast to protect it in the cooking process. Those pieces were then discarded because they were overcooked. I think it's fairly easy to see why we don't use this process in modern times. Is that what the point of this was? What? If you prefer, you can cut off the portion where the two side muscle pieces are and be left with a solid chunk of meat. I prefer to tie that portion together with butcher twine to sear. When wrapping the Beef Wellington up with a Disels and prosciutto, I form as tight and uniformly shaped cylinder as possible. A uniform shape is the key to an even cook. There's a point, there's a goal with this article? I don't know. I don't know what's happening anymore. This scroll bar is so long. Help me. Anyways. I'm gonna scream. It's so repetitive. This is definitely writing an essay to meet the word count core. Prior to putting the puff pastry on the Beef Wellington, you will quickly sear the beef tenderloin, parentheses, Chateaubriand, parentheses. Note, you are just searing it, not cooking it at this point. Beef tenderloin, or in this case, Chateaubriand, is essentially a filet mignon roast. Help! I know this! You told me already! cows parentheses. Honestly, you're so right. I'm surprised we didn't have to go back this far. You're right, I am going to have a fear of beef Wellington after this. Anyway, the next section. Is all of this work necessary? I don't know, is it? We're like 4 sections in. Beef tenderloin, filet mignon, chateaubriand, which are all the same piece of meat. I can't do this. Which are all the same piece of meat. Ow. I'm gonna have to mute you. That's fair. I understand. Have a good day. Doesn't have that extra beefy flavor that, say, a ribeye or strip steak does. Okay. This is the reason that many restaurants serve a sauce with filet mignon. That's true. Essentially, it is beneficial to amp up the flavor. Okay. Essentially, it is beneficial to amp up the flavor. Beef Wellington does just that. Beef with layers of duxelles, prosciutto, and puff pastry add that special something to take this cut of beef over the top. There's one thing that beef tenderloin does have that other cuts do not. That is the soft mouthfeel of the beef. I hate the word mouthfeel. This fucking sucks. When cooked perfectly, it truly is the most tender cut available. Many choose to serve their beef Wellington with a sauce, and some prefer it without. But you just said that the sauce is needed! Where are we? The mouthfeel of the beef. It doesn't feel good to say out loud. Really enjoying the ear feel of your most dramatic reading. I'm glad that you enjoy this. There's so much more I have to fucking read. Whenever you see beef Wellington in the future, you're gonna burst out laughing. Honestly, I don't think I'll ever be able to hear it. Beef Wellington without dying ever again. A few words about puff pastry. That's the name of this section. We have a few words. It's 5 paragraphs. I want to freaking explode. Before I scare those of you unfamiliar with puff pastry, you can find it in the freezer section of most grocery stores. For those who aren't familiar, puff pastry, although made from only a few ingredients, is fairly labor-intensive to make. Note, do not confuse puff pastry with phyllo dough when you purchase it. You want puff pastry sheets. You may find puff pastry in the center part of most grocery stores. I'm gonna throw up. The center part, not the edges. The edges are too fatty and have too much muscle. We have to focus on the center part. I can't do this anymore. Puff pastry is made from hundreds of layers of extremely thin dough with as many thin layers of butter in between. Okay. The butter has to be cold out pliable during this process. Cold out pliable? What does that mean? Okay. Imagine beating a bunch of... Hello?
Clean the brush. Beat the devil out of it. And we're ready.
Imagine beating a bunch of butter until it's very thin, then making a layer on top of a basic dough. Beat the shit out of your butter is the instruction. Then fold that layer over and over. Next you flatten and roll that piece of dough. Repeat this process by folding the dough, rolling the dough while chilling the dough. Help! What does this mean? Sounds like fun, doesn't it? Does it? I haven't figured out what's going on. Maybe if you have an industrial machine to facilitate the process. Count me out! Learning how to make beef Wellington is already quite labor-intensive. Maybe someday I'll be inspired to make my own puff pastry again, but I don't think that is happening anytime soon. Bitch, you wasted like 3 paragraphs explaining how to make the dough, and now you're like, not me though. We're not doing that. What do you mean? What is the point of this section then? When I was a teen, I would make homemade apple turnovers and make my own puff pastry. Back then, I used to surprise my mom with special treats I'd make in the kitchen. Then adulthood happens, and we have to prioritize our valuable time. I can't do this anymore. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'll calm down. That just took me out. Commercially available puff pastry. There are a few brands of puff pastry available to purchase at your local grocery store. Most commonly where I live, I find Pepperidge Farm brand. Pepperidge Farm puff pastry is made using vegetable-based fats. This is the variety I find where I live. You said that already, yes. We love the word count. She's really stuffing that word count. Like she should be stuffing that puff pastry with the center part of the tenderloin. Also available for many is Dufour brand, which is made with actual butter. Trader Joe's also carries an all-butter puff pastry. If I had a choice, I'd pick an all-butter version. However, I've used the Pepperidge Farm brand and it comes out fantastic as well. Shortest section so far, that's the only paragraph in that section. Working with puff pastry. The goal with puff pastry, to keep it cool. So true. I often will defrost mine in the refrigerator overnight. Typically, I find that within 4 hours, the pastry will be ideal to work with. If you go to unfold the puff pastry and it is rigid, let it warm up on your countertop until it is pliable enough to work with. Dust your work surface with just a little bit of flour to keep the dough from sticking. Remember, that dough has a bunch of layers within it, so be gentle with it. Treat it lovingly. That part is not what she said. I added that because that's what it reminded me of. Be gentle with your dough. Treat it lovingly. Cradle it before you place it onto the flour bed. not to make you guys confused. Love dough. Beat butter. That part where they're like, imagine beating the butter is insane. I still am not over that. Give it a sweet kiss before burning it in the oven. Honestly, yeah. Mwah! Get roasted. I like to roll my dough out on a silicone mat dusted with just a bit of flour. However, doing it right on your countertop is okay as well. Thanks. We did just talk about putting it on the countertop, though, to get it warmer. Where'd the mat come in? Just now, I suppose. I use the silicone mat, so once the dough is rolled out to an ideal size, I can easily pop it back in the refrigerator to keep it cool. Okay. To get that beautiful golden color on the pastry, an egg wash is applied to the pastry dough prior to baking. An egg wash of just a beaten egg or egg mixed with just a small amount of water will work. On my Wellington, I just use all egg. When making beef Wellington, you can make the pastry as simple or decorative as you like. For years, I just put the base wrap on it and then used scraps of dough to make simple decorations. Other times, I just simply scored the pastry a bit with a paring knife and baked it just like that. I've always wanted to do a lattice and finally accomplished that with the help of a lattice cutter. They are available online, and though making the lattice with a cutter is still a bit tricky, it certainly is doable. Oh, we get a whole section on using a lattice cutter. Let's go, boys. Ever wanted to know how to use one? She gave us 3 lengthy paragraphs about it. Boy howdy, my favorite. Why do we have another section about how to work with puff pastry? We just had one 2 sections ago. What do you mean? Sorry, I'm reading. I was reading ahead, but I saw that we had another section about working with puff pastry, but we just finished that one. It's literally going, working with puff pastry, using a lattice cutter, how to work with puff pastry. But we already know how. I hate this. Anyways, using a lattice cutter. If you are looking to make a stunning beef Wellington, decorating the top with a lattice is gorgeous. Okay. Not a very, subjective opinion there. You can find lattice cutters readily available on Amazon. We did talk about how you can find them online in the last section. Yes, we did. I know this, but thank you. You also linked to lattice cutters twice up there. After you roll out the cold puff pastry to the desired size, roll the lattice cutter across the surface of the pastry lengthwise. Make sure to use decent pressure to push down and cut all the way through the pastry. Make sure the pastry dough is cold when you do this. If the pastry is too warm, it will not cut well. Even if you are doing everything correct, there is a chance that some of the pastry will not be cut all the way through. If this is the case, use a paring knife to carefully cut through the lines the lattice cutter made on the dough. Now here is the tricky part. Ideally, you want to carefully separate or pull apart the lattice so that the spaces between are visible. If you are able to pull it apart, cover it with a piece of plastic wrap and refrigerate it until you're ready to put it on top of your base pastry dough on the beef Wellington. Yuno's inner writer is screaming, just wait until I get to the start of this fucking paragraph. I'm dying. Not going to lie here. I started to pull mine apart and I had a lot of areas that I had to cut through with a paring knife. It was my own fault as the dough warmed up faster than I thought. Remember, if you have any doubt, toss the pastry back in the refrigerator for 15 minutes or so, then proceed. The reason I put 2 packages of puff pastry dough in the ingredient list is purely for a buffer. Since most grocery stores are closed on major holidays, You can't just run out and buy more if you need it. Spend the extra $3 for a peace of mind. Or for peace of mind. Although they used the wrong piece. They spelled P-I-E-C-E instead of P-E-A-C-E. I want to die. If you don't use it, no worries. You can make a number of delicious things with puff pastry. What? How to work with puff pastry. This applies more to those who are trying to create the perfect lattice on top of the beef Wellington. Trust me, I've had my fair share of puff pastry issues in the past. Making a lattice just requires a little bit of extra love and attention. If you notice from my pictures of the lattice on my Wellington before it was cooked, I did not try to separate the lattice. I was intimidated to try to pull my pastry apart as it didn't cut all the way through. So instead of rolling and cutting another piece, I picked it up and put it on my base layer. I then used my paring knife to lightly cut through the lines on the dough. I really wanted to test how this would work out. How else would I know if it works right? Sure? Yeah. In theory, as long as I cut through that top layer, then the pastry should puff and separate. You could imagine how thrilled I was to peek through the oven door and see the pastry looking just gorgeous. They really like the word gorgeous. What will I do differently next time? I let my dough get too warm when I went to cut it, and I attempted to cut it on my silicone mat. Now, if the dough was cold enough, I'm sure it would have been just fine to cut on the mat. I should have picked the mat up and put it in the refrigerator prior to running the lattice cutter over it. In the future, I'll do a few experiments with the puff pastry and report back with my findings. This person gave us like 6 different warnings about refrigerating it, and then they were like, but I didn't do that. I let it get too warm. And so it's causing them to remind of like, but put it in the fridge. We know, you told us already. The order of operations isn't happening here. They're acting like they know what they're doing, and then they're like, I didn't do this. But you should. Do as I say 6 times, not as I did. Honestly, yeah. Basically. What is Disels? I think it's Zels? Zels? Disels? I'm bad at French. Disels is a French term used for a mixture of finely chopped mushrooms, shallots, and herbs sautéed in butter. As the ingredients are sautéed, the majority of the moisture is removed from the mushrooms, and you are left with a thick mass of mushrooms. It can be made with the addition of some liquor, such as sherry for additional flavor, stock, or even a touch of cream. Disels is made with a single or multiple varieties of mushrooms. Using more earthy mushrooms will give a stronger boost of mushroom flavor. White button mushrooms, for example, have a very mild mushroom flavor compared to cremini, which are baby portobello mushrooms. I personally like to use a mix of white button and cremini mushrooms for my Disels because I prefer a milder profile. Feel to use any combination of mushroom varieties you prefer. Yeah, feel to use, guys. Feel to use. The most important part of making Disels is getting the mushrooms cut down to a similar small size prior to cooking. Removing the majority of moisture from the Disels helps to assure our pastry doesn't get subjected to additional moisture when cooking. We already said the Disel is supposed to be really dry. Of course we're going to be removing the moisture. Ugh. Circular reasoning! There are many applications for Disels in French cuisine. French cuisine is capitalized, by the way. And it is not specific to just beef Wellington. For starters, it would be excellent folded into an omelet, to stuff ravioli, served on toast points, or stuffed in chicken breasts. What the fuck is a toast point? Only the corners of the crust, obviously, not the center. This is somehow the most Yuno-core piece of writing ever made. It hits every critical comedy point. Do not say that this sounds like my writing! Most importantly, the Disels provide an insulating layer to protect the beef tenderloin from the heat required to puff the pastry. Remember, it is a delicate dance to have the beef cooked a perfect medium rare and the outside pastry golden brown. My recipe calls for extra Disels than some other recipes I've seen in the past because that layer is critical to getting a great result in the end. Oh my god, please. I want to explode. The 2 biggest challenges of making beef Wellington. 1. Learning how to cook the puff pastry perfectly without letting moisture ruin it and turning it into a soggy mess. 2. Knowing how to not overcook the beef tenderloin in the center of the beef Wellington. Fuck! Beef tenderloin in the center is sending me back. War flashbacks. Make it go away. Make it go away. Overcook the beef tenderloin in the center of the beef Wellington while having the outside golden brown. I promise you don't need divine intervention to make a perfect beef Wellington. What you need is Gentile. They didn't spell it right. They spelled Gentile. Gentile guidance. I cannot stress these points enough. Ugh. Get as much moisture out of the Disels as possible. Too much moisture will ruin the puff pastry. Keep all of your ingredients cold. Prematurely warm puff pastry equals poor puffage in the oven. Chilling the Wellington also helps it keep a uniform shape. I can't do this anymore. Why did we just come back to the what not to do? This doesn't explain anything about the Disels. Ah! I'm dying. I can't do this no more. The prosciutto layer. Hey guys, we're gonna learn what a prosciutto is. Can we guess what cut of the meat it's gonna be? Prosciutto, or Parma ham, comes in two forms. Prosciutto crudo, a raw cured ham, and prosciutto cotto, which is a cooked ham. I will use prosciutto crudo for an additional layer in our beef Wellington recipe. Prosciutto, I'll refer to prosciutto crudo as just prosciutto for the remainder of this article, is made from high-quality pork legs. The legs are salted for a period of time, then washed and hung to dry at a certain temperature for an even longer time period. The resulting meat is safe to eat raw because of the curing process. Depending where prosciutto is made, the length of time it is hung, and what it is seasoned with will all contribute to different flavor profiles. When using prosciutto for this recipe, you can either order it sliced thin from your butcher or buy it prepackaged. For this beef Wellington recipe, you will lay down overlapping, in bold, overlapping pieces of prosciutto to form a prosciutto blanket for the Disels and meat. Since prosciutto doesn't have a very high moisture content itself, it makes another barrier to protect our puff pastry from moisture. Tips! Overlap the prosciutto to make a solid sheet of meat. Not the sheet of meat. Was that the first use of bold in the article? Yes. I believe so. Sometimes these tips are bold and in a different text color, like the tips are usually in brown. But that's about it. Yeah, I don't like sheet of meat. I don't like those words next to each other. Any holes will allow moisture to escape. Chill the prosciutto prior to trying to remove from the packaging. If it gets warm, it will tear easily. Once again, we are stressed by things getting warm. Everything must be cold. Take your time when handling prosciutto. If it does tear, push it back into place to cover the hole. I like how they're like, don't let there be any holes, but if it does tear, cover the hole. Yeah? Obviously? But why is that step 3? You could have just put the chill the prosciutto bit somewhere else and put the other steps next to each other. Oh my gosh, we're actually on to proper steps. Whoa. Whoa, wee, woo, wow. You sure are cooking the person who wrote this, though? Yes, and I will continue to do so, because it's funny. How to cook beef Wellington. If you've made it this far learning how to cook beef Wellington, I assure you, the rest is easy. Preheat your oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. Don't even think about putting your meat in there. Don't word it like that! Don't word it like that! Don't word it like that! I'm out of here. I gotta go, actually. Maybe stream's over. I give up. True, also no. I'm not a coward. I'll still keep reading, but I cannot believe they worded it like that. Don't even think about putting your meat in there until it's fully preheated. I set up an oven rack in the lower third of my oven. This will allow more for better browning of the bottom of the Wellington in most ovens. What is that sentence? I can't do this. This is the kind of thing I've been dealing with this entire, like, period of time I've been reading this article, guys. I can't. This is iconic. This needs to be put in the Museum of Modern Art. Anyway. This part's in all caps, so I guess I have to yell. Here's the yelling part of the yelling Zatsu. Invest in a cooking temperature alarm if you don't already have one! As it says. That is the title of this section. It's all in caps. The other ones haven't been in capital letters like that, so I assume that we are yelling. I used to just check the temperature of my beef with an instant read thermometer, but there is a better option. A thermometer that you can leave in the meat while it is cooking saves you from opening the oven door is a great investment. Huh? Okay. It's easy because I just put the probe deep into the center of the meat. Please stop referring to it as the meat. And I can see what temperature it is on their app or the device itself. For an instant read thermometer, I use a ThermaPen. ThermoWorks has a vast selection of cooking alarms and instant read thermometers at different price ranges as well. Okay. Whatever you say, I guess. Whatever you say, I guess. How do you want them to call it? I just don't want it to be called the meat! Are these still instructions? Maybe. They used to be. I don't think they are anymore. When you have the egg wash on the puff pastry and are ready to bake the beef Wellington, place it on a size-appropriate sheet pan. Spray the pan lightly with cooking spray. If you don't have cooking spray, rub a little bit of vegetable oil on the pan. Stick the probe of your cooking alarm deep into the meat. I prefer to stick it in from the end and as far as the probe will go. They have to know what they're doing! It won't be... It won't be in the center of the whole Wellington, but as long as it is in the center of the beef, it will be fine. What temperature should I pull it out of the oven? Is the name of this section. The million-dollar question, and the reason a lot of people mess up when making beef Wellington, is what temperature to pull it out of the oven. In my article about cooking a standing rib roast... Oh, you've written other articles? That's crazy. I discuss carryover cooking. That is, a rise in internal temperature of the meat after removing it from the heat, whether in oven, grill, or stove. What's fine for content? I can't! I beg of you to not read that one. I can't, man, I clicked the link and it's not there anymore. It's not there anymore! They got rid of it! That's a bummer. They do have a bunch of other recipes, though. 1 recipe per week. It's gotta be out there on the net somewhere. I'm sure we could find it. Lock it behind Tier 3 members. Tier 3 members get the live recipe readings. Sure. Okay, the important lesson to learn here is that the higher the temperature you cook a piece of beef and the larger it is, the greater the temperature will rise upon resting after the cook. The most basic answer as to why this happens is that the cooler inside of the meat is forming an equilibrium with the warmer outside. Okay, I figured it out. I was like, what? Why is there a cooler in the meat? I figured it out. In simple terms, that heat makes the inside temperature of the beef go up. So what on earth do we do now? I've been asking that this entire article, to be honest with you. How do you estimate the rise in temperature so you don't overcook it? It's a fine dance. You need the meat to rest so when you cut into it, all the juice won't run out. That's the last thing we want to happen, especially when puff pastry is involved. This is where I got into trouble in the past. I underestimated the big temperature rise after pulling it from the oven. I got into trouble. The beef Wellington was like, no, no, no. Naughty, naughty. You didn't make me right. I'm gonna spill all my juices. Wait a minute. Wait. I take that back. Anyway. For medium rare beef, I want a finished temperature of 130 to 135 degrees Fahrenheit. I remember cooking a beef Wellington last December, thinking pulling it at 115 degrees Fahrenheit was conservative. The beef unfortunately ended up being about 140 degrees Fahrenheit. What's the old saying about fooling someone? Oh yes, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I wasn't letting that happen again. Some recipes say to pull it at 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and although that may have been okay, this was a 3-pound tenderloin roast. I pulled at 105 degrees Fahrenheit. That's in bold, apparently. This is the lowest I've ever pulled a piece of beef out of an oven or grill. What's the worst that happens? I borderline cook it rare? I like how that's how the section ends. That's where they're leaving it. Okay. I feel like I've learned nothing. Importance of a temperature probe when cooking beef Wellington! We already know about the temperature probe. You wrote a whole section about it. You made like a sponsored post. I'm dying. I set the beef Wellington on top of my stove and didn't touch that temperature probe that was in it. If I pulled it out, the juice would come with it. Okay, this time it wasn't me. This time it's the article. Please. Please. Think of it like a stopper. Don't touch it. I needed it to stay in the beef to watch how fast the temperature would climb and what temperature it would climb to. I sat there watching my phone as the number kept climbing. Not Wellington. Me neither. I'm not very Wellington at all. Would you believe that over the course of 30 minutes, when the temperature finally stopped climbing, the beef measured 135 degrees Fahrenheit? Let me say that again. This part's in bold. This Wellington rose a full 30 degrees upon being removed from the oven. If I pulled it at 110 degrees Fahrenheit, it would have hit 140 degrees Fahrenheit. I was honestly shocked. I did it! At last, a perfect medium rare beef Wellington. If there is any nugget of information you take from this article, that would be the most important one. What's the worst that happens if you don't quite high enough to the target temperature you want? As long as you didn't cut the Wellington, stick it back in the oven for a few more minutes. No harm, no foul. That's a crazy paragraph. I feel like I just read a lot of words. What did they mean? Are they giving us instructions or recounting a tale? Both, I guess? Or like reiterating the importance of a temperature probe. Now remember, I reached 135 degrees Fahrenheit because I let it rest a full 30 minutes. If I would have only let it rest 15 minutes and wasn't monitoring the temperature, it wouldn't have been anywhere near that. Something also to note, my Wellington and the additional layer of puff pastry for the lattice on it, providing an extra layer of insulation. The accuracy of your oven, the size of the roast, the thickness of the puff pastry, the thickness of the Disels, all will affect the length of the cook and the carryover cooking. When it comes to cooking meat, I always say you can cook it more, but you can't go backwards. That is the first time you said that in this article. You do not always say that. We are now on to a section called Supplies to make Beef Wellington, and a link to their Amazon storefront. To find supplies for making a perfect Beef Wellington, visit my Amazon storefront for my recommendations. I won't, but thank you. Why are we on to storing the leftovers? You haven't taught me what we're doing with the Wellington. What do you mean? I don't know anything that's going on. We're already talking about the leftovers. Help. Help. What leftovers? How to store Beef Wellington leftovers. If possible, slice only enough Beef Wellington as people are going to eat. Storing it as a big piece will make it easier to reheat to get better results. Cover the remainder and store it in the refrigerator for up to 3 days. How to reheat Beef Wellington. Reheating Beef Wellington and having it be as spectacular as when it first came out of the oven is a big ask. However, that is not to say you can't enjoy it as leftovers. The challenge with reheating it is having the puff pastry remain flaky and crisp. Not overcooking the beef is the other major concern. I do not recommend reheating in a microwave, as you'll be left with soggy pastry. Oh, actual instructions! Oh my god. Preheat the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Remove the leftovers from the refrigerator and allow them to come to room temperature for 30 minutes. The goal is to gently cook the beef while having the heat high enough to bring some integrity back to the pastry. Where'd the integrity go? Did she lose its integrity? Where'd it go? That's such a weird way to describe it, but okay. Sure. Heat the Beef Wellington until it reaches your desired internal temperature or no higher than 130 degrees Fahrenheit for medium rare. Time to reach desired internal temperature will depend on many factors, including the size of the Beef Wellington you are reheating and actual temperature of your oven. Rest the meat for 5 minutes, then slice into portions, then serve immediately. Only microwave Beef Wellington as a last resort. I guess this is another section, but it's tiny text and bold. They didn't make it a section. If you do not have an oven and a microwave is your last resort, slice the roast into thick serving-sized pieces first. Then cook the Beef Wellington slices on medium heat for 1 minute initially, then in 30-second increments until warmed gently throughout to your liking. It will still be delicious. The pastry will not be crispy, however. Actual cook time will depend on the wattage of your microwave and how big the piece you are reheating is and what temperature you like your beef. Low and slow is the best way to not overcook the meat. We got to the actual recipe, fellas! We got there! There's like a whole list of how to actually make it! And I guess the rest of this page is just the comments. Guys, we made it. We found the real recipe! They gave instructions for the microwave cooking, but not the other preferred options, basically. But we did get to the recipe. The prep time will apparently take a full day, but the actual cook time is 30 minutes. And it serves 6. We're not getting the life story of the cows, we are not. We have our list of equipment, the ingredients, how we prepare everything else. That's crazy. So there actually is a recipe. I just had to slog through the top part. It takes longer to read this document than to cook it. To be fair, I stopped a lot to laugh and cry. So maybe if we cut out the laughing and crying time, it would be around 30-ish minutes. But unfortunately, I was laughing and going insane. My favorite part of this article is definitely the center. I'm never going to be able to look at a Beef Wellington the same way ever again. 3-pound beef tenderloin center cut. Ugh. I can't look at the word center cut ever again. Please. I can't. I'm not strong enough. I'm not strong enough. No. Y'all, if you go back to any part of the stream, it should be the part where they're talking about the tenderloin, because that was probably the funniest part. Just how often they repeated that the tenderloin is the center cut of the sirloin. It's just so funny every single time. Why is it so good? I hope you had fun with that. This is what makes an editor quit. Me. I'm editor. I'm leaving. Why is that clipped? Why is that clipped? I'm so pissed. What the hell?
Rewind the vibe! Rewind the vibe!
And your dad swallows.